So I finished watching The Polygamist last weekend over a period of 3 days, and I have a lot of things to say. Watching this as a movie, as a show, but art does reflect life, and being Ghanaian and understanding African cultures, there was a lot of truth in what I was watching in this polygamist show. Some people may be watching it and they may say that, oh, this is an African thing. But the reality is that men cheat everywhere. And it's not just about what men are doing, it's also how some women are actually enabling it. A lot of that is reflected in the show. So here are my takeaways. So the first thing I want to share is that we need to start seeing things for what they are. Bad behavior is bad behavior. If you see it once and you let it slide, it escalates twice, 3 times. At some point, you just need to have a threshold. You need to say that, actually, this is exactly what it is. What I'm seeing is exactly what it is. And normally we say things like, if it walks like a duck, it swims like a duck, it talks like a duck. Obviously, ducks can talk, but you get my point. Then it is a duck. And at some point, you need to stop making excuses for it, because if not, you are the one who becomes delusional. That's exactly what happened to the lady. I've forgotten her name, the main character. And even her daughter was saying that, Mom, are you not seeing this for what it is? So that's the first thing. Call bad behavior for what it is. So the second point is to know your threshold. At which point are you going to act? This is not just about relationships. You can also think about what those thresholds are when it comes to your workplace, your environment, your manager. At which point is that toxic culture going to be enough? At which point do you say, you know what, this is enough. I'm done with it. Because the thing is that if you do not understand your threshold or reach that threshold, you'll not really have an honest take of your reality. And so when you get to that point, you also then need to start to think about how you're going to survive. And leads on to the third point, which is knowing your options and building an exit strategy. Because once it hits that point, you're going to ask yourself, what do I have available? How am I going to get out of this? And by the way, this is not necessarily in sequence, because you might start thinking of your exit strategy now, and then you go back to your threshold before you know what the bad behavior is. So it can go in any order. But the thing is that you do need to evaluate your reality, identify your threshold, and need to actively think about what those options are to be able to leave that toxic workplace, that relationship. So what's that exit strategy going to look like? And it can be all kinds of things. So that's for you to actually figure out personally. What do you have in terms of options? What money do you have? Which places can you go to? What skill set? All of that. The fourth point I want to share is really about having a coping mechanism, because you're dealing with the reality. You've got the thresholds. You're thinking about the options. How are you surviving it in the meantime? And that's the truth. In The Polygamist, the lady was fixated on her social media and was quite performative in the way she behaved, and even her kids called her out for that. I think this is really about her surviving. You know, that barbecue thing that they used to have on Sundays between the two of them, that was so pretentious to me, but it was how she was coping. And so what someone might be doing to cope, that's on them. For me, I like to travel. I like to go to nature, have nature walks, sitting somewhere quietly. I'm not saying that I have an exit strategy, but whether you are or you don't, whether you're going through tough times, you're going through, or you're just living, you do need to have a coping mechanism, and this really falls into the well-being aspects. So share with me what it is that works for you. But the fifth point is really about understanding that you are a product of your environment. You know, the ending of that movie stayed with me. It stayed with me because the son started off so lovely, so gentle. He was actually such a lovely guy, but he ended up being almost unrecognizable because he seemed to have been hardened and was quite aggressive towards women. But that was because he was repeating his father's patterns, his father's behaviors, even going back to the same woman that his father had been with. It was all so messy. I mean, imagine. And that was not an accident. You might be thinking that, oh, you're making a choice that is okay for you, but you have to still think about what that is doing for someone else and the modeling. You know, what are you passing on? Because someone has to break that cycle. Someone has to think that, you know, at this point, I'm going to stop. This is not going to work for me. I'm not going to expose my kids or myself to a particular behavior. Science shows that actually, you know, it permeates. It's one bad apple creates lots of rotten apples. So I think there's a lot of moral lessons to be learned from this story. This is why it's become a viral point, but it's worth sitting with to understand what it is that the choices that we make and how it impacts everyone around us.